All right, guys, we are back with part two of the Fertitta documentary, How a Man Walked Through the Bloodbath. Today, we're going to get into how Frank Fertitta Jr. built his Vegas empire, avoided the handcuffs and the bloodshed of the time period Vegas mobs, and how he built a clean empire to hand off to his two sons, Frank III and Lorenzo Fertitta. Before we get into it, guys, I want to talk about something kind of going on with the channel right now. YouTube has decided they don't necessarily like my content, maybe my tone, maybe my honesty. I don't know. It's not a complaint. I just want to let you guys know, be aware. Subscribe if you want to see these documentaries keep coming through or any of my other content, because likely YouTube is not going to be pushing anymore. YouTube shows you what impressions, like how many people it shows your video to in like time frames. So they went from like generally in the first 24 hours, I would get like 24 or like 40,000. They would show it to like 40,000 people in the first 24 hours. Well, now here lately, that's gone down to about 400 people in the first 24 hours. And I've had people contact me and let me know that when I reply back on comments and things like that, they're no longer getting the YouTube notification that I have replied back to the thread, all that. So you can make of that what you will. Whatever reason YouTube has come up with, they have decided they don't care for my content, I suppose. But we're going to keep pushing it out. I know you guys are going to keep watching. Just make sure you hit subscribe so you see my new drops and things like that. Anyways, guys, with that said, let's get into it. This is a juicy one. This one is fun. I put so much time and research into this one. Sorry, I planned to have it out a little earlier, but kind of, work got in the way. I had to do some traveling for work. So here we go, guys. This one's fun. This is a crazy story. Frank Fertitta Jr. Let's get into it. Las Vegas in the mid to late 1970s was a killing floor with a casino attached. July 25th, 1972, former FBI agent and high-profile attorney Bill Coulthard turns the key in his Cadillac in a downtown parking garage. 4 sticks of dynamite detonate. The blast is so powerful it punches a hole through the concrete floor. His body is identified by dental records. By the middle of the decade, the bodies keep coming. Street executions, car bombs, the Chicago outfit, Kansas City, Milwaukee, and the Cleveland families are still skimming the big strip joints. Stardust, Tropicana, Fremont, Hacienda, while Tony the Ant Spilaccio runs the street enforcement like a medieval warlord. Most men who touched that world either wore handcuffs or ended up buried in the desert. One man walked straight through the middle of it, never made the front page of the crime blotter, never caught a federal indictment, and never ended up in a witness chair. While the old strip burned, he built something new, quietly, off the main drag, and handed his sons a foundation so thoroughly washed that it would one day buy the biggest fight promotion on earth. This is the story of Frank Fertitta Jr. Part 1. Frank Fertitta Jr. did not roll into Las Vegas as a made man. He came from Texas, Galveston blood, with the old Maceo era whispers that never quite die in certain Gulf Coast circles. The research traces the family tree carefully, the 2 main branches, the earlier Galveston connections, and the quiet migration west. Now let's talk about those 2 prongs and the family's plan to take back Galveston, Texas, and Las Vegas simultaneously. But before we get any further, legal disclaimer and notice. While this documentary series goes to great lengths to establish historical context, names, and timelines based on specific public records and news archives, it is crucial to state clearly no member of the Maceo or Fertitta families has ever been convicted of crimes related to illegal gambling or organized crime affiliation. Any discussion of syndicate ties, operations, or historical allegations is presented strictly as a review of public reporting, historical theories, and for narrative entertainment purposes. And guys, as we know, there is no such thing as the mafia. It does not exist. All right, guys, let's get into it. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the Maceo and Fertitta wealth and the exact genealogy. Let's just, for any of those that aren't fresh on part 1, let's kind of just rehash the genealogy a little bit. So the original Galveston generation was Sam Maceo and Rose Maceo. They founded the Maceo Syndicate and all the Galveston operations. They had a sister, Olivia Maceo, who married a Frank Fertitta. That is how the Fertittas tie into this family. The generation goes, the Frank and Olivia Maceo had three sons: Frank Fertitta Jr., Vic Fertitta, and Anthony Fertitta. Sorry. Now, Frank Fertitta Jr. had sorry guys, notes are a little crazy here. Oh yeah. So Frank and Olivia had the three boys who would later go on to take over the Galveston branch, and then out of those boys, Frank had his Frank Jr., who went on to Las Vegas, and Vic had Tillman Fertitta. Now, Tillman Fertitta, we're going to get into a little bit later. That's fascinating because Vic and Tillman reconquered Galveston together after the Texas Rangers shut things down around 1957. Vic and his son Tillman really just changed the whole trajectory of the family's Galveston fortunes and, reinvested the ill-gotten gains, you could say, into legitimate properties, and absolutely blew up. Tillman Fertitta is probably bigger and wealthier than even Frank and Lorenzo. So, anyways, the plan was kind of this. They sent Frank Jr. to Vegas. He was 21 years old at the time. They sent him to Vegas to take over. Legal gambling was becoming a thing in Vegas. They had just been shut down of their illegal gambling empire in Galveston. So kind of the family plan was we send Frank to Vegas to build an empire, learn the ropes, figure out what the play is there. And while Vic figures out how we kind of reconquer Galveston. So that was kind of what was going on. Vic and Frank are brothers. Anthony didn't factor into this a lot. He just kept running, basic operations in Galveston. So this is primarily Vic and Frank, the two brothers. Now, Vic was about 3 years older at the time. So this is 1960 when this plan happened. 1960, they make a plan. Frank Fertitta Jr. goes to Vegas to suss out the situation, figure out how they're going to build their empire there, while Vic, who is 24 at the time, really starts his washing of the family, I guess you could say, in Galveston, and really pursuing like legitimate businesses and things like that with the offshore money that they were able to keep from that Ranger bust and the deals they made. So, anyways, a little bit about Tillman Fertitta and Vic Fertitta and their Galveston reconquest. This isn't the focus of this, so I just want to touch on this briefly to just kind of give you an idea of what they were doing around this roughly same time frame. So, they built Landry's Inc. Now, they scaled Landry's from a single seafood spot into a massive corporate empire, swallowing restaurant chains, luxury resorts, and high-end entertainment venues nationwide. They rebought the Galveston waterfront. They rebuilt the historic offshore pier in the Galveston Island Historic Pleasure Pier, acquired the luxury San Luis Resort, and bought up prime seawall real estate. Then they made some mega purchases. Tillman dropped $2.2 billion to buy the NBA's Houston Rockets in 2017. He acquired the Golden Nugget casino chain and expanded aggressively across global gaming and sports. Now, that's crazy, and that kind of illustrates how much the family's wealth was preserved after that 1957 Texas Ranger bust on the Bolognese Room, and when they shut down, that illustrates, if anybody had any questions on whether they got to keep those illegal gambling profits and the millions they'd made and all the offshore accounts, that pretty much confirms. for Vic and his son Tillman to, in the span of, 50-ish years, 50, 60 years, somewhere in there, to basically own most of Galveston, Texas. Honestly, most of the island. I mean, they brought back, they own, so much of that island. And then for him to even own, the Houston Rockets, to buy the Nugget casino chain. I mean, that's not just, oh, I started a seafood restaurant called Landry's and it blew up and I made all this amount of money from it in, 50, 60 years. No, that is playing with a lot of money that was preserved from their syndicate days. So, anyways, let's go into a little bit of the footprint that the Macios and the Fertittas still have in Galveston. I want to touch on that a little bit more before we move on and get back to Frank in Las Vegas. So, they have a culinary monument, Maceo Spice and Import Company. It's on Market Street in downtown Galveston. It was founded in 1944 by Rosario Maceo. And, as you know, he is the uncle of Frank and Vic. It operates today as an iconic Galveston landmark run by Ronnie Maceo and Concetta Maceo Sims, famous for imported Italian goods, specialty spices, and signature muffaletta sandwiches, serving as a direct living link to the original Galveston syndicate roots. Now, let's get into rebuying the island. Tillman Fertitta and his Landry's Incorporated. While Frank Jr. branch conquered Las Vegas, Vic Fertitta's son, Tillman Fertitta, used family hospitality capital to rebuild and dominate modern Galveston. He redeveloped, owned, and operated the Galveston Island Historic Pleasure Pier. On the exact side of Galveston's historic offshore. The San Luis Resort Spa and Conference Center, the premier luxury resort on Galveston seawall, owned by Tillman Fertitta. Hilton, Galveston Island Resort and Holiday Inn on the beach. Anchor Hotel, properties controlling seawall tourism, owned by Tillman Fertitta. Seawall Dining Monopoly, major dining institutions including Landry's Seafood, Fishtails, Saltgrass Steakhouse, and Bubba Gump Shrimp, owned by Tillman Fertitta. When the state authorities closed down the Bolognese Room in 1957, the family didn't lose their fortune. They split their strategy. Frank Fertitta Jr. headed west to build a legal casino empire off the Las Vegas Strip. Meanwhile, back in Galveston, his nephew Tillman Fertitta and his father Vic would eventually buy back the entire island waterfront, turning the very shoreline where their Macios once ran illegal gambling ships into a multi-billion-dollar hospitality empire. Now, obviously, they did this through the money gained by the Maceo branch that we've already talked on. That is pretty much undisputable at this point. Undisputable by my theory. Here was another interesting point about Tillman Fertitta. This is kind of a full circle moment. Tillman Fertitta is actually appointed as the U.S. ambassador to Italy. Talk about a crazy arc. Sicilian bootlegger roots building a crime syndicate family. And now he is literally the U.S. ambassador to Italy. So crazy stuff, guys. To Wall Street, Tillman Fertitta is just a hard-nosed corporate titan who bought the Houston Rockets and the Golden Nugget. But to those who know Gulf Coast history, it looks less like modern corporate growth and more like a syndicate reclaiming its throne. The rumor remains the Maceo money didn't vanish in 1957. It just waited a generation to buy the island back legally. All right, guys. Now back to Frank Jr. I just thought that was interesting, that little, and I know I kind of butchered it. My notes are kind of all over the place. I mean, guys, I've, a binder. I have like 100 pages here, so I'm kind of all over the place with my notes, and I'm gonna try to tighten the ship a bit. We're back to Frank now, and we're gonna get into this. Sorry, when I just showed you my notes, I lost my place in the notes again. Of course. Right. I'm a pro, guys. I'm an absolute pro. All right, back to Frank Jr. In the 1960s, he started on the floor, dealer, floor supervisor, eventually general manager material at places like the Fremont. He learned the real mathematics of the house, not the games, not that the tourists played, but the soft count, the credit, the juice, and who actually controlled the flow of cash when the doors closed. By the time the 1970s turned lethal, Frank Jr. already understood something the loud boys in the strip never fully grasped. The real sustainable money was not in the high profile skim, it was in the locals. Now, let's get into Frank's early climb up the ladder. Frank Jr. was not a broke, desperate kid fleeing Texas on his last dime. Moving to Las Vegas and working as a bellman was not about poverty. It was a calculated strategy for regulatory survival, operational mastery, and legitimate integration into Nevada's gaming system. When the Texas Rangers dismantled the Galveston Vice Empire in the late 1950s, the senior leadership, Sam and Rose Macio's inner circle, successfully insulated their assets, real estate holdings, and liquid wealth without facing major prosecution. At age 21 in 1960, Frank Fertitta Jr. was the nephew of the Macios and the son of Olivia and Frank Sr. He wasn't the direct controller of the syndicate's bankroll, nor could he simply show up in Las Vegas with an unverified chest of Texas syndicate cash. There was regulatory shielding, the Nevada Gaming Control Board. During that time, the 1950s and 1960s Nevada reality, formed in 1955, the Nevada Gaming Control Board was aggressively investigating mob funding, money laundering, and illegal syndicate money trying to buy into Las Vegas casinos. If 21-year-old Frank Jr. had attempted to buy a casino floor immediately using Galveston capital, regulatory red flags would have triggered background investigations, license denials, and federal scrutiny. By entering the Vegas ecosystem as a bellman, dealer, pit boss, and eventually general manager, Frank Jr. built a 16-year bulletproof, state-documented resume in legal gambling operations. Working entry-level and floor management roles provided total operational cover while he mastered legal Nevada casino mechanics, house odds, and customer retention. Family capital remained safe, insulated, and clean, while Frank Jr. proved his individual capability as an executive. When he finally co-founded the casino, what would later become Palace Station, in 1976, he was fully vetted, licensed, and respected by Nevada gaming regulations as a proven local gaming manager, completing the transition from illegal Texas syndicate roots to legitimate Nevada gaming dominance. This wasn't like a rags to riches story where he had to go restart in Vegas. This was absolutely family calculated precision. Go in, integrate, figure out the strategy, and build the empire. This was a masterclass, honestly. So let's get into yeah. Let's dig a little deeper into kind of Frank's timeline and the positions he held and kind of some of the influences he was around during the time. So in the 1960s, his entry point, he first started working at the Tropicana Hotel and Casino. He was a bellman, and while he was a bellman, he was training to become a dealer. Now, the Tropicana opened in 1957 and was secretly controlled by New York City's Genovese crime family via Frank Costello and his associate Frankie Carbo. Daily cage skimming was funneled directly back to the East Coast Syndicate. Now, the next one he worked at was the Stardust. He ranged from a dealer to a pit boss to an executive floor manager. And the Stardust was owned via the Argent Corporation and funded by the Teamsters Central State Pension Fund, which sorry guys, we're gonna get into the what the Teamsters pension fund is in a bit, and Jimmy Hoffa and kind of all that control over that. But for now, let's just continue breaking down kind of Frank's different roles in his different casinos, because I just want to illustrate all the different mob associations and families and dangerous people that he was around during the time, and um, somehow managed to just completely navigate his way through it. It's crazy. So, anyways, yeah, the Stardust. So next, he worked at the Fremont Hotel and Casino. He was a general manager and executive manager. And now that one was managed alongside the Stardust, also under Argent Corporation umbrella during the 1970s. Regulators later investigated skimming operations at the Fremont. Fertitta maintained complete innocence and was fully cleared by regulators in 1990. We'll get into that more later as well, because yeah, there was a 5-year investigation directly into Frank Fertitta Jr. that he completely escaped from, scot free, no indictments, nothing. So he also worked at Circus, doing various casino management roles. Circus was financed with Teamsters pension fund loans via Jay Sarno, and later subjected to extensive skim operations managed by Carl Thomas. We'll get into who Carl Thomas is later. He was a good friend of Frank Fertitta Jr. And for the Midwest outfit bosses. He also worked at the Sahara Hotel and Casino as a pit operations and casino management boss. The Sahara was owned by Del Webb. The Sahara was subject to informal mob influence, kickbacks, and loan allocations via Teamsters network brokers throughout the 1960s and 70s. Um, Sorry, guys. My eyes are watering. Ugh. Allergies, man. Allergies. Sorry. I'm a real professional here. I'm falling apart. Coughing. Got the hay fever going on. Jeez. Man. Alright. So that was kind of his track record running through the local casino scene, um, before he started his own casino in 1976. And he actually continued kind of doing managerial positions for some of these casinos even after he started his in 1976. Now let's also get into a little bit of the families around at the time, some more of the specific names, and a little bit of the difference between what the Galveston world was and what the Las Vegas world was. And guys, speaking of the Las Vegas world, honestly, like, I don't know how many of you have been to Las Vegas, but I can't even imagine what it must have been like in, the 60s, 70s, 80s when all the mob stuff was going on, because it is a different world even still. Like, I've only been there a few times, and it's been several years since I've been there, so, I don't know, maybe it's changed, but I doubt it. But it is literally just like a whole different world. I mean, you don't ever know what time of day or night it is, because it all just runs together, because the city just never sleeps, and there's just parties going on all the time, and just gambling, just street performances. I mean, I would often find myself just wandering around the strip, going into different locations and having a good time, watching street performers and fountain shows and what have you, and thinking, oh, well, I come from a small area where everything's closed at like 8 o'clock, so I'm watching, all this crazy stuff going on. I'm just lost in the moment and lost in the world. And, I'm thinking, I start head back to my hotel, and I'm like, well, it's probably getting late. I know it's a big city. It stays awake a little longer. It's probably, 11 o'clock or something like that. And I get back to my hotel, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and the city was still just alive and thriving, and like I said, street performers and limos and parties and dancing. It's crazy. And it's in the middle of the desert too. For those of you that don't know, I mean, it's literally just this crazy vice city in the middle of the desert that just never sleeps and parties 24/7. It's crazy. It's wild. And that's just my experience from the strip. Obviously, I haven't lived in Vegas and lived the, just regular Vegas worker life. But, from my experience of just going and experiencing the strip, it's wild. And so I can't even imagine, back 60s, 70s, 80s, that Vegas. That must have been crazy. But, anyways, back to the matter at hand. So, in Galveston, it was a tightly controlled island monopoly run by Sam and Rose Maceo. Protection relied on localized precinct payoffs and political handshakes, but fragile when statewide rangers cracked down. Now, Vegas, 1960s Vegas, or really just that whole area, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, Vegas was a war zone, a hyper-violent multi-city syndicate battlefield funded by union pensions, Teamsters, Central State Pension Fund, offshore banks, and national crime families dividing up the strip. Now let's talk about that landscape a little bit and kind of some of the people that were running it. We had, for the Italian mob families, we had Dandy Phil Castell and Frank Costello from the Genovese crime family from New York City. Castell was a key figure behind the Tropicana, the Tiffany of the Strip. When Costello was shot in New York City in 1957, police found a handwritten ledger in his pocket detailing the exact daily skim earnings from the Tropicana casino cage where Frank Jr. later worked, and it was millions. It was crazy. Then we had Tough Tony Accardo and the Chicago Outfit. Owned and controlled major holdings, including the Stardust and Riviera, turning them into massive cash skimming machines. And then we had Tony the Ant Spilatro and his enforcers, sent to Vegas by Chicago to enforce the skim, oversee street rackets, and eliminate threats, creating a wake of car bombs, torture, and heavy FBI wiretaps. And we had Kansas City and the Cleveland LCN families, controlled backroom cash flows at the Stardust, Fremont, and Hacienda alongside Chicago, using couriers, bagmen, to fly untaxed cash out of town. Now, we had a little bit of a Jewish element as well, some Jewish syndicate stuff. We had Mayor Lansky, the criminal mastermind who engineered the concept that legal tax-paying casinos served as the ultimate shield for massive back-end skimming. Then we had Mo Dalitz and the Cleveland mob, built the Desert Inn and the Stardust using Jimmy Hoffa's Teamster pension fund. Dalitz was a terrifying power broker who practically dictated city council policy. And we had our reclusive shadow power, Howard Hughes. Billionaire Howard Hughes bought the Desert Inn, Sands, Castaways, and Silver Slipper, inadvertently acting as corporate cover while the FBI focused on Hughes cleaning up the strip. Underground skims continued underneath his corporate umbrella. Now you may ask, what about the Russian mob? I just wanted to throw this in there because as I've talked to certain people about this, some people asked, well, where was the Russian mob during this time? The post-Soviet Russian mob, the Bratva, was not in 1960s Vegas due to the Soviet Iron Curtain restrictions. However, first-generation Jewish figures like Lansky and Dalitz, Gus Greenbaum, those guys that I mentioned earlier, were sons of Russian Jewish immigrants and building the operational framework that future syndicates copied later on. All right. Let's get into Act 2, the bloodbath part. Let's talk about some of these violent street altercations. During the 1970s, Las Vegas was transformed from a quiet gambling oasis into a bloody battleground between rival syndicates, rogue enforcers, and law enforcement. Running a casino during this decade required navigating a landscape where physical violence was routinely used to resolve corporate and land disputes. July 25th, 1972, the Bill Colhard car bombing. The hit, Bill Colhard, a former FBI agent and prominent Las Vegas attorney, stepped into his Cadillac parked on the third floor of the Bank of Nevada garage in downtown Vegas. 4 sticks of dynamite detonate beneath his vehicle, killing him instantly and tearing through the concrete structure. The motive and the impact, Colhard held a crucial long-term land lease on the Pioneer Club property downtown and stubbornly refused to renew terms with the syndicate-connected operators who wanted control. The brazen hit sent a terrifying signal to all downtown casino managers, including Frank Fertitta Jr., who was operating as a general manager at the Fremont nearby, showing that non-compliance meant violent execution. 1974 through 1979, Tony Spilatro and the Hole in the Wall gang reigned. The enforcer arrives when the Chicago outfit dispatched Anthony Tony the Ant Spilatro to Las Vegas in 1971 to oversee skim operations. Gangland violence spiked dramatically. Local police records noted more gangland executions between 1971 and 1976 than in the prior 25 years combined. That is how violent the Chicago outfit was. And we all know the Chicago outfit, I mean, we all knew that anyways, from Al Capone to Tony Spilatro to Frank Needy. I mean, the Chicago outfit was absolutely unhinged. So, March 19th, 1974, John and Francis Dubeck. Slot cheating syndicate associate John Dubeck and his wife Frances were ambushed outside their apartment complex and executed at point blank range with a 20 gauge shotgun to ensure they wouldn't talk to grand juries. February 1977, the Al Bramlett execution. Al Bramlett, the powerful head of Culinary Workers Union Local 226, was kidnapped at McCarran Airport, driven out into the desert, robbed, and shot multiple times. Bramlett had hired mob bombers for union disputes, but refused to pay after a device failed. In November 1979, Spilatro's chief lieutenant Frank Culata personally executed government informant Jerry Lisner inside his home to shut down federal leaks. Now we get into the federal crackdown. Operation Strawman, 1978 to 1985. By the late 1970s, federal law enforcement shifted away from local street surveillance to execute massive multi-agency wiretap investigations designed to dismantle the entire Midwest syndicate hierarchy under RICO laws. The wiretaps. Federal agencies secretly placed bugs inside the Kansas City villa of mob boss Nick Sevilla and the home of Teamsters loan broker Alan Dorfman. These taps recorded thousands of hours of explicit discussions detailing exact dollar figures being skimmed from the cash count rooms at the Stardust, Fremont, Marina, and Circus. July 4th, 1981, Metro Police and FBI caught Spilatro's burglary crew red-handed during a robbery at Bertha's Gifts on East Sahara. Fearing that Spilatro had ordered a hit to keep him silent, Key Lieutenant Frank Culata turned state's evidence and became a star federal witness. 1983 through 1985, Culata's insider testimony combined with the FBI wiretap logs resulted in sweeping federal RICO indictments. Top bosses across Chicago, Joseph Upa, Kansas City's Nick Sevilla, Milwaukee's Frank Balistrieri, and Cleveland received multiple decade prison sentences, effectively severing Midwest mob control over Nevada gaming. As federal indictments came down, the Chicago outfit began systematically purging high-profile enforcers and public figures who were drawing law enforcement heat or risking cooperation with prosecutors. October 4th, 1982, the Lefty Rosenthal car bombing. Frank Lefty Rosenthal, the outfit's brilliant but volatile executive who operated the Stardust in Fremont, walked out of a Tony Roma's on East Sahara Avenue and started his Cadillac. A massive explosive device detonated directly under the floorboards. Rosenthal survived with minor injuries due to a heavy steel balancing plate installed under the driver's seat of that specific vehicle model, which deflected the blast away from his torso. June 14th, 1986, the execution of Tony and Michael Spilatro. Facing upcoming RICO trials and having brought numerous, tedious federal scrutiny to the outfit's Vegas operations, Tony Spilatro and his brother Michael were lured to an Illinois basement under the pretense that Michael was being promoted to a made man. Once inside, a crew of outfit enforcers ambushed both brothers, beating them to death with blunt force trauma. 8 days later, their bodies were recovered in tidy-whities in a shallow grave in an Indiana cornfield. So while Frank Jr. was climbing, Las Vegas was entering its darkest chapter. All that will illustrate it, from Tony Spilatro, the Chicago outfit's man in Vegas, turned the city into his personal hunting ground. Between the early 70s and early 80s, the street violence became industrial. Executions in parking lots, bombings. The message was always the same. The town still belonged to the boys from the Midwest. The Frank Lefty Rosenthal car bombing. The killing of Tony Spilatro. Above the street violence set the bigger federal war. Operation Strawman, launched in the late 70s, was the FBI's systematic assault on the hidden ownership and skim operations. Wiretaps in Kansas City and Chicago, the Admiral Theater bugs, Carl DeLuna's meticulous handwritten records of the Tropicana skin seized in 1979. By 1983 through 85, the indictments rolled in. Joe Eupa, Jackie Cerrone, Angelo LaPetra, Nick Savella, Frank Balistrieri. The old paper empire frontman and silent partners was being dismantled in open court. This was the environment Frank Fertitta Jr. was operating in. So, how did Frank survive and thrive? What was he up to? July 1st, 1976, while the Strip was still under the old shadow government, Frank Fertitta Jr. and a small group of partners, one of those partners being Carl Thomas, which we'll get into a bit later, opened a 5,000 square foot gambling hall attached to the Mini Price Motor Inn on West Sahara, just off the Strip, in a location almost no one thought would work. They simply called it the casino. 100 slot machines, a handful of table games, a snack bar. 1 year later, in 1977, they expanded it, added a big bingo room, and reopened as the Bingo Palace. Frank Jr. was in for a piece, but by 1979, he bought out his partners, including Carl Thomas, a man who would later be convicted in the Tropicana skimming conspiracy. Fertitta cleaned the ownership table. This was the first true locals casino strategy in modern Las Vegas. Cheap food, giveaways, bingo, high volume slots, and a parking lot full of people who lived in the valley instead of flying in from Chicago or New York. While federal heat and gangland bullets focused on the Stardust, the Tropicana, and the men still trying to run the old skim, Frank Jr. was building a different machine, one that did not require outfit permission or Teamster pension fund loans. In 1984, the property was expanded again, given a railroad theme, and renamed Palace Station. The local empire had a flagship. Now, let's break down that casino timeline a little bit more, because I just think the little details like this are interesting. So, he launched the casino in 1976, like we talked about, under the brand name The Casino. The corporate structure was a joint venture partnership between Frank Fertitta Jr., the former GM of the Fremont, the Thomas fellow we mentioned, and 3 other investors. It was bare bones, 5,000 square foot gambling room, lease attachment from the existing Mini Motor Palace off West Sahara Ave and I-15. It targeted off-shift Las Vegas casino workers, dealers, local service industry employees, cab drivers, construction workers, that sort of thing. So the first major physical edition happened June 30th, 1977, when they renamed it the Bingo Palace and built a 15,000 square foot structural add-on to the original 5,000 square foot, making the total 20,000 square foot. Out of that 20,000 square foot, they allocated 8,000 square feet dedicated to Bingo Hall, hence the name change to the Bingo Palace. They added 300 additional slot machines, a live keno counter, and the property's first sit-down restaurant and buffet. 1979, Fertitta bought out his partners for 100% sole ownership of the casino. Now, here comes the rapid off-strip expansion era, 1978 through 1981. In 1978, physical additions brought the overall building size to 60,000 square feet, introducing dedicated sports betting counters and expanded dining rooms. 1981, constructed a larger standalone bingo parlor and expanded the pit area, officially solidifying its transformation into a full-scale legal casino operation. Railroad theme and rebrand, April 1984. In 1984, they changed the corporate structure to Station Casino Inc. They tripled the main floor area, installed iconic Victorian Railroad architectural themes, added second floor banquet meeting space, and opened the 24-hour Iron Horse Cafe. Total facility size was about 100,000 square feet at this point. Now, the motel buyout and high-rise tower, 1985 through 1991. In 1985, they bought out the adjoining 465-room mini Motor Palace Inn, integrating the land into Palace Station's real estate portfolio. 1990 through 1991, they done a $60 million tower project, built a 21-story hotel tower, 575 rooms, bringing the total hotel room count to over 1,000, expanding the casino floor to 84,000 square feet, and built a 4,300 square foot, a 4,300 space multi-story parking garage for local commuters. At this point, this thing is massive. Yeah, that's all for the casino expansion. Like I said, I just wanted to give a few more details on the casino expansion. I thought it was interesting. Okay, Act 4. Now we're gonna get into Frank Jr.'s strategies and how he avoided the bloodshed, how he avoided ending up in handcuffs, ending up buried in the desert, how he just quietly built his empire outside of any scrutiny from any of the authorities or other dangerous mob families operating at the time. So let's get in. The central question the research keeps returning to is simple. How did a man operating in the same city, in the same industry, during the same bloodbath avoid the indictments, the wiretaps, and the body count? The research lays out the survival code in clear structural points. Now, this wasn't without scrutiny. So actually, let's get into a little bit of scrutiny first, because I don't want to gloss over the fact that Frank Jr. did come under some level of scrutiny. So before we get into how he pulled this off, let's talk about some of the scrutiny. In the 1970s, Vegas street violence and car bombs, like the attempt on Lefty Rosenthal, weren't random. They were fought over strip high roller skims, union pension kickbacks, and Frank Jr. avoided the mob sites through 3 calculated operational choices. Well, this isn't the scrutiny. Where's the scrutiny? Oh, here's the scrutiny. The Genovese skims at the Tropicana. While Frank Jr. rose through the ranks as a floorman and pit boss, the Tropicana was secretly controlled by New York City's Genovese crime family under Frank Costello and Dandy Phil Castell. In 1957, a ledger found in Costello's pocket provided the daily skims. Blah, blah, blah. We know that. Frank Jr. also managed operations at the Fremont under executives with the direct ties to Kansas City LCN figures and Teamster-funded operations. Now, we're going to get into Carl Thomas, his ally Carl Thomas, and why that brought scrutiny to him. So, who was Carl Thomas? A brilliant, notorious casino executive secretly recruited by the Chicago outfit Tony Accardo, Joey Upa, and Kansas City LCN to run skimming schemes across the Stardust, Tropicana, Riviera, and Fremont. Now, the close association, Frank Jr. and Carl Thomas were close business peers, associates, and good friends, hence why they went into business together to start the casino in 1976. In the Vegas hierarchy, FBI wiretaps in Operation UNRCO caught Thomas explaining cage skimming mechanics to undercover agents. When Thomas and Chicago outfit bosses were indicted, Nevada gaming authorities heavily questioned Frank Jr. regarding his ties to Thomas and whether any illicit skim proceeds helped finance his early off-strip venture, the casino that turned into Palace Station. Frank Jr. maintained complete innocence, and regulations never found sufficient evidence to charge him or revoke his license. There was also the Galveston shadow and lineage scrutiny hanging over him. When Nevada Gaming Control conducted deep background checks on Frank Jr., the Fertitta surname carried immediate, unavoidable weight, with his father and uncles, including Vic, having operated inside the Maceo Syndicate's illegal Galveston gambling dens, like the Bolognese Room. Regulators closely scrutinized whether Legacy Gulf Coast Capital was secretly funding his Nevada expansion. Now, He had lots of allies. Now, we pointed out that that was kind of the family strategy in Galveston in part one, that they make deep political allies and friendships and things of that nature. These guys were brilliant. They knew to befriend, the local politicians and the government, and run towards certain regulations and sharing tax money and things of that nature. So, one of Frank's most powerful political shields during this time, Frank cultivated a deep local political business and law enforcement ties in Nevada by positioning Palace Station as a community hub, providing jobs for working class locals. He built bulletproof civic defense that made him indispensable to Nevada power brokers. Now, one of his most powerful friends during the time, and confidants, if you would, was Oscar Goodman, the defense attorney powerhouse. Before becoming the mayor of Las Vegas, Oscar Goodman was the ultimate mob defense attorney, representing Tony Spilotro, Lefty Rosenthal, and Mayor Lansky. Goodman and Frank Jr. were close personal friends and allies in the Las Vegas ecosystem. Goodman provided deep insights into federal law enforcement and gaming regulations to Frank. Upon Frank Jr.'s death in 2009, Goodman publicly hailed him as one of the most successful business persons in the history of Las Vegas. All right, so that's a little background for you, but let's get into the three prongs of how Frank stayed safe outside of just the smart allegiances he made during the time. Kind of his strategy coming up in Vegas. What kept him off the mob's radar, the FBI's radar. Kind of, what was his strategies? The geography play. The off-strip turf isolation. When Frank opened the casino, later Bingo Palace, later Palace Station, in 1976, it was a 5,000 square foot joint attached to the Mini Price Motor Inn on Sahara Avenue, surrounded by dirt roads. The mob families, Chicago, Kansas City, Cleveland, were fixated on multi-million-dollar strip resorts like the Stardust, Tropicana, Riviera. Frank Jr. carved out an arena they didn't care about: dealers, maids, construction workers, and local residents. By the time the mobs realized how lucrative the local market was, they were already being wiped out by federal RICO indictments. Number 2, the zero union pension debt. Figures like Mo Dalitz and Lefty Rosenthal became mob puppets because their casinos were financed by Teamster Central States Pension Fund loans managed by Jimmy Hoffa and Alan Dorfman. Money that came with the syndicate enforcers attached. Frank Jr. built his early footprint under personal savings and small bank credit and local equity partners like Carl Thomas, ensuring no mob bosses could walk into his back room and demand a cut. And then the valuable friend protocol. Frank Jr. never competed with the mob. He made himself useful to everyone on the floor. During his 16 years as a dealer, pit boss, and general manager across the Stardust, Tropicana, Sahara, Circus, and Fremont, he proved he could run clean, efficient gaming floors without making headlines. Now, the strategy: rather than fighting state oversight, Frank Jr. embraced it. While regulators desperately purged mob influence, Frank Jr. positioned himself as the model candidate for clean local Nevada gaming. By providing reliable local tax revenue without strip scandals, he established a trusted family precedent that enabled his sons, Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta III, to be that allowed his son, Lorenzo Fertitta, to be appointed as a commissioner on the Nevada State Athletic Commission from 1996 to 2000. Frank Jr. understood that true political immunity came from embedding his family into Nevada's civic fabric. He funded major local infrastructure, education, and civic projects, becoming a primary benefactor to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Bishop Gorman High School, where the state's political and business elites sent their children. Frank Fertitta Jr. took his family's Galveston lessons: stay quiet, build civic goodwill, avoid street wars, and own the niche everyone else overlooks. And he built an empire right underneath the noses of both the FBI and the Mafia. Now, did Frank Fertitta Jr. run mob schemes? Federal ledgers say no. But did he sit at the same tables, manage the same count rooms, and navigate the exact same syndicate back-end ecosystem as the men who did? Absolutely. In 1970s Las Vegas, you didn't become a casino mogul by being an innocent bystander. You became one by knowing exactly where the tripwires were and making sure someone else stepped on them first. So, as said, the research lays out the survival code in clear structural points, the strategic insistence on the off-strip pivot, organic cash flow based expansion instead of heavy teamsters or outfit linked financing, low public profile while the high profile targets drew all the federal and street attention, mastery of the new regulatory reality, the Nevada Gaming Control Board, rather than fighting the old Chicago rules. When Operation Strawman and the final purge of the early to mid 1980s removed the old hidden owners and street crews, Frank Fertitta Jr. was still standing. His name was not on the major indictments. His properties were not the ones being raided for skim. He had positioned himself as the one part of the market the outfit never fully dominated, the everyday locals play. He did not need to be a gangster. He only needed to outlast them. Now, I said I would explain the Teamster loan thing, so let's get into that now so I can explain the whole Teamster loan thing I talked about. Okay. To understand mid century Las Vegas, you have to understand the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. In the 1960s and 70s, the Teamsters weren't just a labor union, they were the arterial blood supply of the American economy. If truck drivers walked off the job, the country froze. Food didn't reach tables, fuel didn't reach pumps, and in Las Vegas, clean linens and liquor cases didn't reach hotel resorts. When traditional Wall Street banks refused to finance casino construction, viewing gambling as dirty and high risk, Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa saw a golden opportunity. He took control of the Central States Pension Fund, a massive reservoir of retirement dollars paid in by hardworking long haul truck drivers, and turned it into the personal bank of organized crime. If a mob boss in Chicago or Kansas City wanted to build a neon palace on the strip, they didn't go to Chase or Wells Fargo. They called Jimmy Hoffa. Midwest syndicate bosses brokered multimillion-dollar loans directly from Teamster pension trustees. Approvals required massive illegal cash kickbacks, typically 5 to 10% paid directly under the table to Hoffa, union insiders, or mob fixers. Teamster loans were never just debt, they came with non-negotiable operational strings. Casino owners were forced to hire mob-approved managers like Lefty Rosenthal to oversee casino floors and maintain direct access to the count room. Once operational, cash was systematically diverted out of the count room before tax reporting, the skim, and hand-delivered in suitcases to bosses in Chicago, Kansas City, and Cleveland. Because the mob controlled both casino management and the local union, labor strikes were basically non-existent. A Teamster loan was a pact with the devil. The moment a casino owner signed that pension paper, they didn't just take an interest, they gave up their keys. They were forced to install mob enforcers in management, allow skimmed cash to leave through the back door, and put a target on their own backs when the federal government inevitably came knocking. By the mid-1970s, touching Teamster money was a fast track to a federal RICO indictment, and this is where Frank Fertitta Jr. made the single most important decision of his corporate life. While mega resorts on the Strip took tens of millions in dirty Teamster debt, Frank Jr. refused. When he built Bingo Palace on West Sahara, he financed it through organic casino cash flow and conservative local bank loans and partnerships. By keeping his hands completely clean of the Teamster piggy bank, Frank Jr. ensured his family's future. When federal indictment tore down the mob in the early 1980s, the Fertitta empire had zero paper trails linking them to the pension fraud or count room skims. Financed by Central States pension loans with heavy kickbacks. Oh yeah, so here's a comparison of the models. Here was the strip resorts slash mob slash Teamster model. Financed by Central States pension loans with heavy kickbacks, obligated to accommodate scam operations and mob management, leaving them completely vulnerable to FBI wiretaps, Operation Strawman, and corporate collapse in the 1980s. Palace Station and Frank Fertitta Jr.'s model, financed through internal cash flow and local commercial banking, strategic partnerships, maintain complete operational autonomy, stay off federal RICO target lists, and laid a squeaky clean corporate foundation capable of going public on the New York Stock Exchange in 1993. All right. Now, let's get into part 5. The machine and the juice. I'm going to explain how this kind of ties into modern day sports betting now and why fight fixing is a mobster thing but not necessarily a Fertitta thing, because they figured out the smarter play and how you can always make the house win no matter if a fight is fixed or if what kind of tomfoolery is going on. We're going to get into that. So, at the center of the entire model was the oldest and purest form of casino mathematics, the vigorish, the juice, or the vig. A professional bookmaker, whether running a 1950s wire room or a 2020s mobile sports book, does not gamble. He balances the action and takes his cut off the top. The classic line, a player must lay $11 to win $10. When the book is balanced, the house risk approaches zero. The juice is pure profit. Frank Jr. built station casinos around a high-volume, locals version of the same principle. Slot floors that never slept, bingo, keno, the relentless legal extraction of the house edge from people who came back week after week. The research spends significant time on this exact mechanics, the ringside classroom, and the mathematical certainty that made the off-strip model so powerful. The old syndicate bookies understood it. The corporate operators who came later simply digitized and scaled it. Frank Jr. is one of the first to industrialize it for the local market, while the strip was still distracted by its own civil war. While other kids in the... Oh, and we're going to get into how Frank passed this on to his children, Frank III and Lorenzo Fertitta as well. So... While other kids in the 1970s were being taken to Little League games, Frank III and Lorenzo were sitting ringside at Caesar's Palace and the Stardust watching World Heavyweight Boxing Championships. Frank Jr. wasn't paying for front row seats just to entertain his sons. He was bringing them into his classroom. In an era before Las Vegas had a single major professional sports franchise, Fight Night was the undisputed financial king of the desert. Frank showed his boys that a fight wasn't just a physical contest, it was a high-margin catalyst that forced millions of dollars through the casino floor and straight into the sports book. When Frank built Bingo Palace, he didn't treat the race and sports book as an afterthought. He built it as a neighborhood fortress. He taught Frank III and Lorenzo the single most important rules of sport wagering. The house doesn't care who wins the fight. The house only cares about balanced action. To understand how the Fertittas built an empire, you have to understand the math of the bookie, specifically the vigorish or the vig. Most people think a sports book makes money when bettors lose. That is an amateur's misunderstanding. A real bookmaker isn't gambling. They are running an exchange. If two fighters enter the ring on even odds, a bookie doesn't ask you to bet $100 to win $100. They demand you risk $110 to win $100. That extra $10 is the juice. When the sportsbook balances its board, taking $110,000 on fighter A and $110,000 on fighter B, they collect $220,000 total. Regardless of who gets knocked out, the house pays out $100,000 to the winning side, plus their original $110,000 stake. Total payout, $210,000. The house pockets the remaining $10,000 risk-free. Even if a fight was fixed in the alley, even if the odds swung wildly at the last second, a balanced book guarantees that the house mathematically cannot lose. The mobsters were risking prison trying to fix the outcome. Frank Jr. stayed focused on collecting the guaranteed toll at the door, legally. Because the VIG creates a built-in mathematical margin, typically 4.54 to 10% depending on line movement, the bookmaker the bookmaker takes zero outcome-based liability. Even if a syndicate successfully fixes a bout on the canvas, the sportsbook remains profitable as long as the action was offset on both sides. By bringing his sons to ringside seats during the golden age of Vegas boxing, Frank Jr. instilled a clear lesson. Combat sports drives the highest proportion of emotional, unsophisticated betting handle compared to any other sport. Understanding the value of combat sports handle plus bookmaker mechanics explains why Lorenzo Fertitta and his older brother Frank III acquired the UFC in 2001 for $2 million, and how that was the ultimate play on global combat sports content engine. Also explains why Lorenzo joined the Athletic Commission in 1996 to learn more. So let's tie this in a little bit to modern day sports betting and how the old world and the new world connects, and how the playbook is essentially the same, just with different algorithms. Now it's all AI and tech algorithms and blah blah blah. So, to tie the old world syndicate operations directly to modern corporate casinos and multi-billion-dollar online sports books, a documentary must expose the mathematical and psychological foundation. Modern tech executives and Wall Street suits didn't invent a new business model. They simply took the exact blueprint utilized by mid-century operations, digitized it, legalized it, and scaled it behind a corporate facade. The foundational driver of wealth for both historical street bookies and modern mobile applications is identical: the vig, vigorish, or juice. The old world reality: a professional syndicate bookie never actually gambled or rooted for a specific team. Their primary objective was a perfectly balanced book. If Team A played Team B, the bookie wanted an equal distribution of cash on both sides. By charging a premium, historically requiring a player to lay $11 to win 10, the bookie collected the losing wages, paid out the winners, and pocketed the difference entirely risk-free. Modern mobile sports betting networks use hyper-advanced algorithms to shift point spreads and money lines in real time. This automated shifting ensures the house book remains balanced regardless of public betting spikes. They take the exact same juice into the lines, utilizing massive data servers to lock in mathematically guaranteed risk-free percentages across millions of concurrent transactions. Gambling culture relies completely on a steady stream of dopamine, and combined with the user's illusion of control. The old world manipulated this through physical hospitality. The modern world achieves it through user interface and algorithm optimization. The old world, underground wire rooms and illicit casinos offered complimentary high-end drinks, luxury dining, and premier entertainment to keep people inside the room. They extended lines of credit to losing players. The longer an individual remained engaged, the more absolute the mathematical house edge became, inevitably draining the player's capital. Modern applications utilize hyper-targeted push notifications, free bet sign-up incentives, and highly promoted same-game parlays. Parlays serve as the corporate equivalent of a high-margin lottery ticket, widely marketed, incredibly low hit rates for the consumer, and massive win margins for the house. Instead of a physical enforcer offering credits, digital platforms offer seamless one-tap financial deposits linked directly to a user's bank account. The core thesis of the Fertitta Empire, multi-generational survival, is an evolutionary strategy shifting from evading the law to partnering with the state. In the era of mid-century syndicates, survival required a fragile, incredibly expensive network of localized bribery. The moment legal agencies or state authorities refused to play along, the infrastructures could collapse. The state was a constant existential threat. The modern industry realized that by embracing full government regulation, the state transitions from a hostile hunter into a heavily invested business partner. Following the legalization waves of recent years, state governments now tax sports betting at massive rates. Because billions of dollars flow straight into the state infrastructure budgets, the government is incentivized to protect, legitimize, and legalize and legally insulate these gaming conglomerates. This exact operational DNA is precisely why Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta were the only people on Earth capable of saving the UFC in 2001. When they bought the failing banned human cockfighting brand for $2 million, they didn't keep it underground, drawing from a lifetime of family experience navigating the transition of Las Vegas from mob casinos to highly regulated, clean corporate resorts. They ran the exact same playbook. They didn't run from the government. They ran directly toward athletic commissions, begged for intense state regulation, implemented strict drug testing, and partnered with the state to clean up the sports image. By forcing the UFC into the rigid box of legitimate regulatory compliance, they turned a banned underground spectacle into a multi-billion-dollar mainstream global powerhouse. The street hustle didn't die. It simply wrote the rules of the game. Now, part 6, washing the foundation. By the mid to late 1980s, the bloodbath was ending, the old regime was broken, and Frank Fertitta Jr. began the most important phase of the entire operation, the handoff. He sent the next generation, Frank III and Lorenzo, through the right schools and the right polish, the research details, the 1980s educational track, the corporate finishing, and the deliberate creation of a clean public face. While Frank Jr. was building his off-strip fortune at Palace Station, he was running a second equally critical operation, the total corporate polishing of his two sons. Frank III was dispatched to the University of Southern California to master corporate finance and capital markets, while Lorenzo went to the University of San Diego to sharpen his business management and organizational strategy. Frank Jr. gave them what he never had, institutional pedigree. Back home in Las Vegas during the mid-1980s, the foundation for the family's next multi-billion-dollar empire was quietly being set in a high school hallway. Lorenzo Fertitta attended Bishop Gorman High School, the elite private Catholic prep school where Vegas royalty sent their kids. Walking those same hallways in 1986 was a scrappy, fight-obsessed teenager named Dana White. At the time, they were just kids from different orbits who happened to cross paths. Nobody in 1986 could have predicted that a casual prep school acquaintance would eventually evolve into the most profitable partnership in combat sports history. When the Suns finally took control in the 1990s, the empire they inherited no longer carried the visible smell of the old days. The foundation had been pressure washed by time, regulation, careful distance, and a decade of deliberate image management. That was one of Frank Fertitta Jr.'s masterstrokes. Now, let's talk a little bit about that kind of handoff period. And we're also going to kind of set the tone for going into part 3, some of the labor union dispute. I mean, we're all familiar with the story that it took the UFC much longer to get regulated in New York, right? Well, that kind of ties all back to this and kind of some enemies that Frank had made in the labor unions. And we're going to get into all that in part 3, but we're going to kind of set the groundwork, and we're going to just kind of wrap this up with a little bit of that and the handoff to his sons, Frank III and Lorenzo. So before Frank Fertitta Jr. could hand his sons a clean corporate empire, he had to clear one final massive obstacle. For nearly 5 years, Nevada gaming regulators and federal investigators scrutinized Frank Jr. over allegations of cash skimming from his time as general manager at the downtown Fremont Casino in the 1970s. Frank Jr. consistently maintained his innocence throughout years of legal friction, and in 1990, regulators officially cleared him of all charges. The regulatory victory cleared the runway. In 1993, Frank Jr. officially retired, selling his stake back to the company for over $260 million and allowing Frank III and Lorenzo to take Station Casinos public on Wall Street. But the retirement didn't last. Driven by an unstoppable desire to build, Frank Jr. privately financed his own Texas-themed casino on Lake Mead Boulevard in 1994. The move sent shockwaves through Wall Street as shareholders panicked over the founder opening a competing casino against his son's newly public company. To prevent a full-scale investor revolt, Frank Jr. sold the property to Station Casinos at cost, creating what would later become the iconic Texas Station. Behind the scenes, another battle line was being drawn. Frank Jr.'s strict non-union model at Palace Station triggered a fierce ongoing feud with Culinary Union Local 226, a labor war that would simmer for years and eventually follow his sons straight into the fight business. Nevada regulators investigated alleged countroom skimming at the Fremont Casino during the mob-dominated area of the 1970s. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. We already talked about that. Frank got investigated. He got out. He cleared himself. He was a genius. Yeah, we covered the conflict. And yeah, the Culinary Union Local 226 roots. That feud is what later followed his sons into the drama trying to get regulated into New York. We will get into that in part 3. Frank Fertitta Jr. understood the unwritten rule of 1970s Las Vegas better than anyone who shared a courtroom with him. A count room with him, not a courtroom, a count room with him. If you get too greedy, you end up under a wiretap, and if you get too loud, you end up under a car. While Lefty Rosenthal courted the television cameras and Tony Spilotro turned Sahara Avenue into a shooting gallery, Frank played a much colder, much quieter game. He walked the knife's edge, clean enough to stay indispensable on the casino floor, but strategically isolated enough to dodge the federal hammer when Operation Strawman tore the Midwest syndicates apart. He didn't just survive the purge, he was already building the exit ramp. When the FBI dismantled A. Argent Corporation, Frank was pouring every dollar of cash flow into West Sahara, building Bingo Palace away from the high-stakes crosshairs of the Strip. But his greatest strategic maneuver wasn't real estate, it was his sons. Frank III and Lorenzo weren't raised on the mobbed-up floor of the Fremont. They were insulated, polished, in some top-tier universities. By the time the state spent 5 grueling years auditing the family's books in the late 1980s, there were no skim ledgers or street enforcers to be found, only 2 corporate-ready heirs with pristine degrees and a bulletproof off-strip business model. In 1993, when Station Casinos officially debuted on the New York Stock Exchange, the transformation was complete. Wall Street wasn't buying into the blood-soaked mob era that built modern Las Vegas. They were buying into a clean corporate gaming dynasty. Frank Jr. played his cards perfectly. He let the mob build the foundation and let Wall Street wash it clean. Today, the Fertitta name sits on a different kind of throne. A major local casino company, a controlling stake in the most valuable fight promotion on the planet, an NBA team owner, multiple casino chains, respectable, corporate, clean. Most people who walk through a station property or watch a UFC event have no idea what the ground looked like when the first concrete was poured in 1976, or what was happening on the Strip and in the desert while that little bingo palace was finding its legs. Frank Fertitta Jr. did not just survive the bloodbath, he used the chaos as cover, he stayed off the main kill zone, he mastered the new rules while the old players were still fighting the last war, and he handed his family a foundation so thoroughly washed that the blood never showed on the balance sheet. In the long history of American gambling and the organized crime that once fed it, there are men who got caught, the men who got killed, and the men who understood the game was changing and moved before the door slammed shut. Frank Fertitta Jr. belonged to the third category. That is not luck. That is one of the quietest, most successful long games ever played in the history of Las Vegas. And there we have it, guys. The genius and mastery of Frank Fertitta Jr. Wow. As I always say, I'm new at this, and I know I made mistakes and was all over the place at times, but I hope I done the story justice, because, man, that one is fascinating. That is, wow, what a crazy story. What absolute pure genius. And guys, I can't wait to get into part 3, where we follow Frank III and Lorenzo and their acquisition of the UFC, the partnership with Dana White. We'll get into Dana White being ran out of Boston by Whitey Bulger and his mob affiliations. We're going to keep having fun with this, guys, but wow, this one's been long. I know that one was a lot of research. We've been going for an hour and 14 minutes, basically. So, guys, real quick, as I always end these videos, positive note, get out there, try to beat the heat. You know, I'm not going to say get out there in the heat, but, you know, in some places it's cooling off. But, you know, hey, go exercise, go go get a little jog in at the gym, go to a coffee shop, and one of those local places where people all sit in a row at a coffee bar. You know what I'm talking about. Now, like, you sit and talk to the person next to you or something. I'm not saying man, woman, whatever. Just talk to the person next to you. Start a conversation. It's good for your soul. It's good for your mental health. Get a little exercise in. That's all. That's all we can do every day. Just take a little step forward, and it really does help, guys. How you treat yourself and what you put out there is akin to what you receive in the world, and it makes a world of difference. When you're trying to make sure to eat non-processed garbage and just put real things in your body and get proper exercise and proper sunlight and trying to go be a positive influence in the world and talk to people and be friendly, man, it repays you back tenfold, and it changes you for the better a little bit every day. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to fight the the mental health crisis going on in the world right now, because everybody is so scared and anxious and angry and sad, and um, the world's just becoming more and more chaotic by the day. So if we can just do our small part to make ourselves happy and mentally healthy, but then to also put that back out into the world by being friendly to strangers and starting up conversations and making new friends and just being that positive influence, then not only are we helping ourselves achieve a much better life, we're helping those around us achieve better lives, and we're putting back that positivity in the world, and that's what we're really missing. So, guys, I'm going to end it with that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I done the story justice. And like I said, guys, YouTube decided they don't like me. So make sure to subscribe so you hit my content, and we'll just keep putting it out. YouTube can feel how they feel, and we're just going to keep grinding, guys. So thanks.